Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here at BIDS ImageXD. I just realized that if we spell BIDS, Berkeley Institute for Data Science, backwards, we can get something like satellite-derived indicators of biodiversity, which is very close to the topic I would like to discuss with you today. With the growing access to Earth observation data, such as expanding archives of satellite images, there is a growing interest in applying this data towards questions related to biodiversity and support cost-effective inventories and monitoring efforts. And this can help us shed new light on long-debated questions, such as whether biodiversity contributes to stability of ecosystem function and services, and whether biodiversity contributes to them in a way that can help us better understand their responses to global environmental change and human decisions about landscapes. Previous studies have reported such effects in different ecosystem types, but many of these studies have been conducted in controlled experimental settings. It is less well known whether these effects of biodiversity also apply across broader landscape scales relevant to policy, planning, and conservation. And rapidly advancing remote sensing technology allows us to move these questions to such new, broader, less understood landscape scales. And I would like to highlight especially a couple of prominent applications in relation to plant diversity monitoring. The first one concerns remote sensing-based indicators. Remote sensing images and their time series hold incredible promise to make such indicators available and to also make them much more cost-effective than, for example, metrics developed through more laborious and logistically demanding field surveys. Such indicators are also promising for scaling of biodiversity across different levels of analysis and decision making. In parallel to that, tremendous progress has also been made in terms of remote sensing indicators of ecosystem functions. For example, satellite-derived indices of vegetation greenness, such as popular normalized difference vegetation index or NDVI, can be used as proxies for vegetation biomass, productivity, and their change over time. And all of this raises an interesting question whether these directions can be somehow linked to help us better understand biodiversity contributions to ecological stability of functions in the face of global environmental change. Now, this task has several important challenges once we start moving beyond the controlled setting of field experiments. First, biodiversity effects on functional stability can be confounded by multiple factors that affect ecosystem functions independently from biodiversity. For example, climate or land use can be such factors. And they need to be considered in any upscaling efforts when, again, we move from the local scales of field experiments to these broader landscape extents. Second, remote sensing indicators of diversity and function can be sensitive to spatial and temporal scales of remote sensing image data. This may affect whether the signal that we observe at the pixel level, such as greenness, is really a representative of the underlying diversity, or whether it is confounded with background reflectance from non-vegetated surfaces, obstruction of plants by tall vegetation dominating the pixel view, and similar effects. Another interesting issue is how we define stability of ecosystem function. Previous studies often looked at stability as a ratio of long-term mean to variance in some functional properties, such as biomass. With remote sensing proxies, this can be approximated as the ratio of mean to variance in annual greenness. Again, some previous studies have reported that plant diversity may positively affect such stability. For example, the study by Garcia Palacios and colleagues that showed these effects in drylands and also illustrated the importance of some important covariance. However, the important thing to note is that mean to variance ratios alone don't tell us much about the timing of ecosystem function within the year. In other words, seasonal or phenological variation. Yet, when we discuss, for example, climate change effects on ecosystems and their function, such timing becomes very important because it can be very sensitive to changes in temperature, precipitation, droughts, and climatic patterns. For example, schedule of plant growth and senescence may also affect pollinators and wildlife activity, and all of these connections can be disrupted in the future with the climatic shifts that somehow affect the synchrony or the stability of these connections. So my big interest is whether biodiversity also contributes to stability of functional schedules. And we would like to use satellite image time series to explore this at broader regional scales. And this is really where some of these bigger remote sensing and geospatial data hold a strong promise to support this kind of research, because we not only see incredible progress in imaging as a Earth observation technology, but also tremendous progress in data such as climate, topography, various characteristics of human activities on the landscape that could also be incorporated in these explorations. And now I'm going to share some preliminary insights into these questions from a project that is funded by a NASA early career grant in my group. And in this project, we're investigating various indicators of plant diversity in wetlands. Wetlands present a really interesting case study system because they have very high potential for biodiversity as ecotonal land-water interfaces. They're also of high interest for conservation, and they're being lost across the world at alarming rates. And at the same time, wetlands are also of high interest to natural resource managers due to their ecosystem function. For example, here in San Francisco Bay Delta region and in many coastal regions all over the world, there are growing efforts in wetland restoration to promote sequestration of carbon and greenhouse gases and to improve coastal protection against flooding and land subsidence. All of this is achieved through the productivity of wetland ecosystems and their vegetation. On the other hand, wetlands can also be very complex and spatially heterogeneous, and they are a prime example of systems with lots of confounding effects on plant and biodiversity signals, again, due to background reflectance from mudflats and exposed substrate, also flooding attenuation of signals when flooding is present. In this project, we're working with an interesting database called National Wetlands Condition Assessment, or NWCA. This is an effort led by the US Environmental Protection Agency. It's a survey of a large number of wetland sites across the whole US, which provides very detailed field data on vegetation, including plant diversity, wetland site conditions, disturbance, and stress. This effort is planned to be conducted every 5 years, and the first year was 2011, and only the 2011 dataset has been publicly released so far. The 2016 survey has been completed, and we're awaiting for its release. Of course, linking remote sensing data with such an extensive field database requires the big data tools. Here's an example of Landsat satellite imagery that we overlay with NWCA plots across the whole US to compute their measure of annual maximum greenness from the year 2011 in the Google Earth Engine applied programming interface. So tools like Google Earth Engine make this incredibly more feasible. You can see here that just to get to the 2011 data, we're using more than 290 image tiles, which involve 22 dates per site in that year. And it's a massive effort that is incredibly facilitated by these novel programming cloud-based tools. From this effort, earlier research that was led by my former student, Dr. Sophie Tadeo, who now works at the Chicago Botanic Garden and Northwestern University, found that several indicators of satellite-based greenness and its local spatial pattern actually can be significant indicators of plant diversity in these wetlands. And we also found that in some cases, they explain more variability in diversity than abiotic factors alone, such as climate, soil, and some other factors. But now we're working with long-term satellite data to see whether wetlands with more diverse vegetation show greater stability in the timing of greenness as a proxy for ecosystem function. And again, here we have to come back to this question of how we define stability. Here we developed a special proxy for this, which basically indicates to what extent greenness values at similar points in the growing season tend to vary year to year for a given wetland. So you see the map here, which shows kind of a distribution of the magnitude of this metric as an interannual variability in greenness. And in this case, higher interannual variability means lower consistency or lower stability of timing. And lower interannual variability means greater consistency, greater synchrony, if you will, in greenness values across different stages in the growing season. So to give you a little bit more insight into what's behind each of these data points, what we're essentially doing is we're taking the time series of each wetland and we are compiling it into this type of matrix where we are using here a MODIS satellite 8-day greenness product. So every little step in the horizontal direction is an 8-day step in the year. And then we have multiple years arranged as rows in these matrices. And essentially, more variable wetlands, like you see here on the right, show greater heterogeneity of values at similar steps in the season versus wetlands that could be assumed somewhat more stable. They have greater similarity year to year across different time steps. We can also sometimes find effects of, for example, stage change in ecosystem or land use change, where there is a massive change in the whole pattern of seasonality, and that also affects this measure of interannual consistency. To understand the relationships between this phenological variability, interannual variability in greenness, and diversity, we are testing a large number of models where this measure of interannual variability is used as a response variable, and diversity metrics from the field NWCA database are the key predictor. And in doing so, we're also testing which covariates of such variability are most relevant to these relationships at this broad national scale. And again, when we're thinking about these covariates, we're considered both site level factors that might be representing certain artifacts, such as obstruction of plants by tall vegetation, but also these broader scale contributors to interannual variability in functions, such as climate and hydrological variation. Some of them come directly from NWCA database. Others come from other form of image data sets, such as climate gridded products like Prism and Persian. We also, again, can use tools like Google Earth Engine to process such data and summarize variability for individual wetlands. And in this effort, we so far are finding two important results. I'm going to show you an example for species richness as a diversity metric. First, across different kinds of models and biodiversity metrics, biodiversity variables are always included in the models that have the highest statistical support, and they show negative correlation with this interannual variability in greenness. This is consistent with the biodiversity stability hypothesis. Second, we also see that a number of these landscape scale covariates of variability are also significant in the best supported models and get selected in them. And these include both mechanistic drivers of interannual variability, such as atmospheric temperature, and local site level factors that again could be seen of some of these artifacts, like presence of tall vegetation or some indicators of cyclicality or periodicity in greenness that could be driven by both plant cycles and hydrology, especially in tidal wetlands. What this means is that scaling up biodiversity stability relationships needs to carefully think about these additional controls and confounding factors in order to more clearly interpret the actual effect of diversity. Lastly, we're also comparing these results with similar models, but using more traditional metrics of stability, such as long-term ratio of mean to variance in satellite greenness. And what we see here is that similar covariates get selected in the best models, along with diversity again, but the overall models are weaker compared to the ones with the stability of timing in greenness changes. So focusing on the stability of timing in greenness changes is an interesting and underexplored area that definitely deserves further investigations. As the next steps of this, we're waiting currently for the 2016 NWCA survey to be released in order to validate some of these analyses. We're also hoping to investigate this using other types of diversity indicators, particularly functional and phylogenetic diversity of plants, that may have better clues on why and how specifically diversity contributes to this stability. And also, we would like to test these ideas with other types of remote sensing products, such as, for example, synthetic aperture radar that may be indicative of different flooding regimes in some of these wetlands. In summary, using national scale satellite remote sensing image archives, we're able to detect that plant diversity in wetlands may be contributing not only to stability of their functional indicators, but also to the stability of timing in functional changes. We also see that developing this understanding and upscaling these effects to broad regional levels relevant to decision-making requires incorporating covariates of functional variability. And those covariates include both mechanistic drivers of functional changes such as climate and local artifacts affecting interpretation of spectral signals at a given scale of remote sensing data. But the most exciting aspect of this research journey to me is this incredible potential of open access image products and big data tools that really enable us to push the frontier of these questions beyond the traditional scope of field research and I look forward to exploring new questions resulting from these investigations. With that, I would like to thank my colleagues and NASA Early Career Grant that has been supporting this work, and thank all of you for being here. Please let me know if you have any questions and feel free to reach out by email. Thank you very much.